Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive, and this one is just for you. We're going to be diving deep into obfuscation, because I know you're really interested in getting a handle on it. So we're going to look at all your notes and research. Just to refresh everyone's memory, to obfuscate basically means to make something really hard to understand or to be unclear, confusing, or evasive.
Yeah.
But as you pointed out, there's like a whole spectrum of intentionality behind that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's deliberate deception for sure. But think about all the ways we kind of obfuscate a little bit in our everyday lives,
Yeah.
right? Like a poker face. You know you're hiding your hand. Or even just a little white lie to protect someone's feelings. So it gets really interesting when we start to kind of analyze the motivations behind it all.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into that. You shared some really fascinating personal experiences, like the one about the situation at work with the Slack channel that maybe it was referencing you. I don't know. But it made me think about how the grapevine operates in offices.
The grapevine. I love that. That's a great way to put it. It really highlights how information spreads in ways we can't even predict sometimes, even when it's obfuscated. And in your case, there's that ambiguity, right? Was it just like benign observation? Were they gathering information? Or was it something a little more pointed? It really makes you think about the power dynamics in play and how even just like a seemingly casual thing can make you feel uneasy or excluded.
Yeah. And you decided not to confront them directly, which is a choice in itself, right? I can relate to that hesitation to not want to rock the boat.
Yeah.
But it also made me think about that whole idea of giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially at work.
Yeah, it's such a classic dilemma, like speaking up versus trying to maintain this sense of harmony. But when you don't address it, it almost makes the obfuscation like fester.
Wow.
And it becomes this unspoken tension that can affect communication and trust on the team. So while giving people the benefit of the doubt is generous, there's also a risk that unclear communication just becomes a pattern. And then that affects the whole workplace dynamic.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Now, your notes also touch on why people intentionally complicate things. And you had some really interesting thoughts there, like they want to be in control or they're covering up mistakes, or maybe they just don't even have the knowledge to explain clearly. And it really struck me how you tied that back to basic human psychology.
Well, if we dig into those psychological principles, we can see a lot of these behaviors often stem from being afraid of vulnerability. Like that concept of locus of control. It's basically how much agency you feel you have over things that happen in your life. So someone with a strong external locus of control might feel powerless. And that can lead to obfuscating as a way to try to regain a sense of control, even if it's not real.
Oh, that's so interesting. And you also made a point of saying we should have compassion. Like instead of judging people who obfuscate, maybe we should try to guide them toward clearer communication.
Exactly. Like, just consider the possibility that maybe they're obfuscating, not because they're trying to be malicious, but maybe they just don't have the skills or the confidence to say what they mean. So, offering support and guidance can empower them to communicate more authentically. And that just leads to more productive and fulfilling interactions.
Okay, so let's change gears a little bit to something a bit more lighthearted.
Hmm.
You shared this story about a secret admirer from high school. And I gotta say, it was giving me total rom-com vibes, like all the mystery and anticipation, and then the eventual reveal.
Oh, it's a classic. It's a story that taps into that primal need for connection that we all have, right? Romantic ambiguity, especially at the beginning, can be super alluring. Think about dopamine, that neurotransmitter that's all about pleasure and reward. Well, uncertainty triggers that, which explains why the chase can be so exhilarating, even if it ends up being emotionally exhausting down the
So
line.
you're saying our brains are kind of wired to be drawn to a little bit of mystery?
In a way, yeah. But as your own experience shows, there's that point where the allure of the unknown becomes a need for clarity and a real connection. The hard part is finding that sweet spot between keeping a sense of intrigue and being respectful of the other person's feelings and emotional energy.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
Speaking of missed connections, you shared that story about the gym, which really resonated with me. Just perfectly illustrates those everyday moments when subtle cues and unspoken anxieties can lead to miscommunication,
Yeah.
especially in those settings where it's mostly nonverbal communication.
Absolutely. It's like a textbook example of how we project our own insecurities onto other people. We make up these stories in our heads instead of just taking a chance and starting a conversation. And a lot of times we overestimate how bad it would be if we got rejected.
So what's the antidote to all that overthinking? How do we break free from that and just go for it?
Well, there are a few things you can try. First, remember that rejection is often because of the circumstances, not because of you as a person. And then second, try the 5-second rule. Count down from 5, and then just do it before you overthink it.
I love that. It's like hacking your brain.
Yeah, exactly. And even if it doesn't turn into something long term, you've still practiced those social skills
Mm.
and built up your confidence for next time.
Which, at the end of the day, is what it's all about, right? Now, you also talked about being more proactive about avoiding misunderstandings,
Hmm.
especially in those high-stakes situations. You mentioned doing your research and reframing your perspective, and really made me think about how much preparation can help with communication.
Oh, for sure. When we take the time to try to see things from the other person's point of view, to understand their background, their possible biases, we're less likely to jump to conclusions or get defensive in those tough conversations.
Like putting on empathy glasses.
Exactly. And then when misunderstandings happen, because they always will, it's about mastering the art of the pause. Take a step back, breathe deeply, choose your words carefully, and you can usually de escalate things and have a much more productive conversation.
That's such a good tip.
Mm.
And it reminds me of something else you mentioned, the complexities of politics and finance. It's almost like those fields were made for obfuscation, don't you think?
Well, there's definitely a tendency to use jargon and statistics and complex terminology to create a sense of authority and exclusivity. But honestly, transparency and clarity are essential for building trust and accountability, especially when it comes to things that affect our lives in such a profound way.
So how do we become more discerning about the information we take in, especially when it comes to these topics that are really dense?
Well, it starts by recognizing that just because something is complex doesn't mean it's intelligent or accurate. Sometimes it's just a smokescreen. So don't be afraid to ask for clarification. To break those complicated ideas down into smaller chunks that are easier to understand.
So it's about giving ourselves permission to ask questions,
Yeah.
not being intimidated by jargon or fancy terms.
That's it. And remembering that even the most complex issues can be broken down into simpler parts.
It's like that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Exactly. And by doing that, we can start to really grasp the complexities and come to our own conclusions.
This has been such an insightful conversation. We've talked about so much, from what happens at work to the psychology of secret admirers, from those awkward moments at the gym to the complexities of politics and finance. But we're not done yet. We'll be back in just a minute to keep diving deep into this fascinating world of obfuscation.
And as we go even deeper into this, it's important to remember that obfuscation isn't always some deliberate act of manipulation.
Right.
I mean, think about all those times when we've been unintentionally unclear ourselves. Maybe we were nervous or just didn't realize how our words might come across.
Yeah, it's like that saying, we judge ourselves by our intentions, but others by their actions. And when you add in things like cultural differences and communication styles, it's no wonder people misunderstand each other.
Exactly what might be seen as direct and assertive in one culture could be aggressive or insensitive in another. And even within the same culture, people have such different communication styles. Some are really talkative, and others like to keep it short and sweet. That can definitely cause friction, especially when those styles clash.
Makes you wonder if there are any universal principles we can use to navigate those differences and minimize those times when we unintentionally obfuscate.
Well, one key principle in active listening. It's not just about hearing the words, but really paying attention to those nonverbal cues, asking clarifying questions, and making a real effort to see things from their perspective.
It's about going deeper, right? Not just the words, but the emotions and intentions behind them.
Exactly. And it's about being mindful of our own communication style, especially when we're talking to people from different backgrounds or cultures. When in doubt, err on the side of clarity and be really upfront about what you mean.
It's like building those communication bridges brick by brick. Speaking of bridges, let's go back to that workplace scenario.
Yeah.
You decided to give your colleagues the benefit of the doubt, which is great, but it also shows how avoiding direct communication can backfire.
It's true. Unresolved issues, especially when they're kind of shrouded in mystery, can really fester and affect the whole team. Imagine if instead of assuming the worst, you had talked to a colleague you trust or even your manager to get their take on things. It might have opened up a conversation that would have led to more understanding and clarity.
It's a good reminder that getting an outside perspective can be really helpful, especially when we're stuck in our own heads about something.
Exactly. And sometimes just voicing our concerns, even if it's just tentatively, can help clear the fog of obfuscation.
Okay, let's switch gears again and revisit that secret admirer story. It's funny how the mystery and anticipation can be so exciting, even when it's mixed with a little anxiety.
It shows the power of the unknown, right? How it sparks our curiosity and imagination. But there's a fine line between playful intrigue and just causing unnecessary emotional drama.
It's like a delicate dance, finding that balance between mystery and clarity early on in a potential relationship.
Absolutely. And your experience highlights how important it is to recognize when that balance has tipped too far towards ambiguity. You chose to prioritize your need for clarity, even though it meant potentially losing the connection. That shows real emotional maturity.
It makes me think about how important it is to set boundaries, even in the most ambiguous situations. Speaking of navigating ambiguity, let's talk about that gym encounter. It's crazy how even in those everyday situations we can get so caught up in our own heads. We make up these elaborate stories that prevent us from connecting with people.
It's classic overthinking. We project our insecurities onto other people, assuming they're judging us, or that we'll seem awkward or desperate. But the truth is, most people are just as nervous about social interactions as we are.
It's like we're all in this awkward dance together, afraid to make the first move.
Exactly. And your approach of not taking it personally and trying again another time is brilliant. It takes the pressure off and lets you approach future interactions with a more relaxed and confident attitude.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the simplest approach is the best one. And, it ties back to that idea of reframing our perspective that we talked about before.
Absolutely. Instead of seeing those missed connections as failures, we can reframe them as chances to grow and learn. Every interaction, no matter how brief, helps us refine our social skills and become more comfortable with the ambiguity that comes with being human.
It's like building that resilience muscle, right? Learning to bounce back from those perceived setbacks and approach every new encounter with curiosity and openness.
Exactly. And remember, even if a particular interaction doesn't turn into something long term, you still put yourself out there, expanded your social circle, and sharpened those essential communication skills.
So it's about embracing the journey, even with all its twists and turns and unexpected detours. Now let's circle back to that idea of obfuscation in those more complex areas like politics and finance. You mentioned how people in those fields tend to use jargon and complex terminology to create a sense of authority and exclusivity, which can be really intimidating for those of us outside those circles.
It's true, and this kind of obfuscation can be especially sneaky because it often masquerades as expertise. They use technical language, statistics, and complicated models to create a barrier to entry for anyone who doesn't have that specialized knowledge. And that makes it hard to question their assumptions or hold them accountable.
It's like they're creating an exclusive club where only those who speak the secret language are allowed in.
Exactly. And this kind of obfuscation can be used to manipulate public opinion, hide conflicts of interest, and shield those in power from scrutiny.
So how do we break through that barrier and become more informed and engaged citizens, especially when it comes to these complex issues?
Well, it starts with recognizing that complexity isn't always a sign of intelligence or truth. Sometimes it's just a smokescreen meant to confuse and mislead.
It's about learning to see through the smoke and mirrors, right?
Exactly. And that takes developing our critical thinking skills. We need to question our sources, consider different perspectives, and demand clear and understandable explanations.
It's about taking back our power in the conversation and not just accepting what's given to us, but demanding transparency.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that true expertise lies not in complexity, but in the ability to make complex ideas accessible to others.
That's such a good point. It makes me think about how we can apply that to our own lives. Not just when we're dealing with politicians or financial advisors, but in our everyday conversations too.
Absolutely. Think about how often we use jargon or overly complicated language, maybe to impress people or hide our own insecurities. Trying to be clear in our own communication not only helps people understand us, but also encourages them to do the same.
It's like setting a higher standard for how we interact with each other.
Yeah.
This whole deep dive has been an exercise in clarity itself, breaking down this complex concept of obfuscation and looking at it from all angles.
Yeah, it really
As we start to wrap things up, what's the most important thing you've taken away from this conversation?
For me, it's the realization that we're not helpless when it comes to obfuscation. By understanding the tactics and motivations behind it, we can develop the critical thinking skills we need to navigate a world that's overflowing with information, both clear and unclear.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's also about recognizing those times when we might be part of the problem ourselves. Even if we don't mean to, maybe you're being evasive in a conversation or using jargon to sound smarter than we are.
It's a humbling thought for sure, but awareness is the first step towards change. By paying attention to our own communication patterns, we can work towards being more transparent and authentic in our interactions.
And by doing that, we not only deepen our own understanding of the world, but also help create a more informed and empowered society.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into obfuscation for now. We'll be back in a bit to finish up and leave you with some final thoughts to ponder.
Okay, and we're back. It's amazing how this whole idea of obfuscation shows up everywhere, from those little awkward moments to big stuff like politics.
Yeah, it really shows how the way we see things is shaped by how we get information or how it's hidden from us.
You were saying earlier that sometimes the simplest explanation is best. But then we see the exact opposite, like in finance, where they use so much jargon, it's almost like they think being complicated makes them more believable.
It's an old trick. Think about those ancient priests or oracles. They use all that cryptic language to seem powerful. And nowadays, it's often about having more knowledge than the other person, which can lead to manipulation. The person who knows more uses that to their advantage.
So how do we escape that? How do we become, like you said, more discerning about information?
We have to change our mindset. We
Yeah.
can't just passively take in information. We have to actively look for it. Don't be afraid to ask questions, even if you think they're silly. Demand clarity. If someone can't explain it simply, maybe they're hiding something.
So it's about taking back control, not just accepting what we're told, but demanding transparency.
Exactly. And realizing that real expertise is about making complicated things easy to understand.
That's a really good point. It makes me think about how we can do that in our own lives, not just with politicians or financial people, but in everyday conversations.
Oh, absolutely. Think about how often we use jargon or make things sound more complicated than they need to be. Maybe to impress others or because we're insecure. But if we try to be clear in how we talk, it helps other people understand us. And it encourages them to do the same.
It's like raising the bar for how we communicate. This whole deep dive has been about being clear, taking apart this idea of obfuscation and really examining it.
It really has.
So as we wrap up, what's the biggest takeaway for you?
I think it's knowing that we're not helpless against obfuscation. If we know the tactics and why people do it, we can learn to think critically and navigate this world that's full of information, some of it clear, some of it not.
That's so true. And I think it's also important to realize when we might be part of the problem without even meaning to. Like maybe we're not being direct in a conversation or using fancy words to sound smarter.
It's something to think about, but recognizing it is the first step to changing it. If we're aware of how we communicate, we can try to be more open and real.
And when we do that, we not only understand the world better, we help create a society that's more informed and empowered. Well, that's it for our deep dive into obfuscation. We hope this has given you some helpful insights and tools to navigate all the complicated ways we communicate. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep the conversation going.